You think you can put your hands on her in my town? The slap echoed through the Desert Rose Diner like a gunshot. Cassidy's head snapped to the side, her cheek already burning red. Sheriff Frank Morrison stood over her, his badge catching the fluorescent light, his hand still raised. Every customer froze. Every fork stopped midair. The only sound was Cassidy's ragged breathing and the quiet hum of the ancient Coca-Cola cooler in the corner. Then came the scrape of a chair. A man in worn leather stood up from the corner booth, tall, weathered, quiet as a coiled snake. He hadn't said a word since he'd walked in 20 minutes ago, but now his eyes cold and gray as winter steel locked onto the sheriff. "That's enough," the man said. Morrison turned, his face twisted into a sneer. "Who the hell are you?" The man in leather didn't answer. He just took one step forward, then another. And in that moment, everything in Redemption, Arizona was about to change forever. Before we continue, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end of this story. You won't believe where this goes. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Jackson Ironside Reeves had been riding for 16 hours straight. His back ached. His hands were stiff on the handlebars. The desert sun had cooked him through his leather jacket, and his throat was dry as the cracked earth stretching out on both sides of Route 60. But none of that mattered. He wasn't here for comfort. He wasn't here for rest. He was here because Tommy Wrench Calabrese, his brother, his friend, the man who'd pulled him out of a burning meth lab in Barstow back in '98, had called him 3 days ago with a voice full of gravel and desperation. "Jackie," Tommy had said, using the name only old brothers were allowed to use, "I need you in Redemption. There's a girl here, Cassidy. She's in trouble, real trouble, and I can't do this alone anymore, brother." Tommy's voice had cracked on that last word. Tommy, who'd stared down gun barrels and knife points and federal agents with nothing but a grin and a middle finger. Tommy, who never cracked. Jackson had hung up, packed his saddlebags, and rolled out before dawn. Now, as he pulled his Harley into the dusty parking lot of the Desert Rose Diner, he could feel it, the weight in the air. The tension that settles over a place where bad things happen in broad daylight and nobody does a damn thing about it. He'd felt it before, in a dozen towns just like this one. Places where the law wasn't the law at all, just another gang with badges instead of patches. He cut the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the distant buzz of cicadas. The diner looked like something out of a postcard from 1962, turquoise paint peeling off cinder blocks. A neon sign that probably hadn't worked in a decade, windows so dusty you could barely see through them. A bell over the door chimed as he pushed inside. The diner was nearly empty. An old man nursed coffee at the counter, staring into his cup like it held the answers to questions he'd stopped asking. 2 truckers occupied a booth near the back, their conversation dying the moment Jackson walked in. Their eyes tracked him, the leather vest with its patches, the road dust on his boots, the way he moved like a man who expected trouble and wasn't particularly worried about it. Behind the counter stood a woman, mid-30s maybe, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. She wore a pink uniform dress with Cassidy embroidered over the breast pocket, and when she looked up at him, Jackson saw what Tommy had been talking about. Her left eye was bruised, the purple-yellow kind that was a week old and still healing. There was a cut on her lower lip, scabbed over, but it was her eyes that told the real story, haunted hollow, the eyes of someone who'd learned to expect pain and stop fighting it. "Sit anywhere you like," she said, her voice flat and practiced. "Coffee? Please." Jackson slid into the corner booth, the same one that gave him a view of the door, the counter, and the kitchen entrance. Old habits. Cassidy brought the coffee without making eye contact. Her hands shook slightly as she set the cup down. Jackson noticed the bruises on her wrist, finger-shaped, dark against her pale skin. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded and turned away, but not before Jackson saw her wince a hand, going instinctively to her ribs. The bell over the door chimed again. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. 3 men walked in. The one in front wore a sheriff's uniform that looked like it had been tailored specifically to show off his physique. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of square jaw and cold blue eyes that probably made him homecoming king back in whatever small-town hell had spawned him. Mid-40s, graying at the temples in a way that probably made certain women swoon. His badge gleamed, His boots were polished to a mirror shine. Sheriff Frank Morrison. Jackson didn't need an introduction. He could smell a predator from across the room. The two men flanking him were deputies younger, meaner, with the hungry look of dogs that had been kicked too many times and now did the kicking themselves. One was bald with a neck like a tree trunk. The other had a ratty mustache and eyes that moved constantly, looking for weakness the way sharks smell blood. Morrison's gaze swept the diner, cataloging everything. When his eyes landed on Jackson, they lingered for just a moment, assessing, measuring, before moving on. Not a threat, just another drifter passing through. Cassidy, Morrison's voice boomed across the diner, jovial and cruel at the same time. There's my favorite girl. How about some service here? We've been protecting this town all morning. Man works up a thirst. Cassidy's entire body went rigid. Jackson watched her shoulders hunch, watched her take a breath like someone about to go underwater. Coming right up, Sheriff, she said, her voice somehow even flatter than before. She moved behind the counter, reaching for the coffee pot with hands that trembled visibly now. Morrison took a seat at the counter, his deputies flanking him like gargoyles. The bald one, his name tag read Rollins, leaned his elbows on the counter and grinned at Cassidy with too many teeth. Looking good today, Cass, Rollins said. That shiner's really bringing out your eyes. The deputies laughed. The truckers in the back booth suddenly became very interested in their plates. The old man at the counter stared harder into his coffee. Cassidy poured Morrison's coffee without responding. Her jaw was clenched so tight Jackson could see the muscles jumping. Morrison took a sip, made a face, and set the cup down hard enough to slosh coffee onto the counter. What the hell is this? It's coffee, Sheriff, Cassidy said quietly. It's piss. Morrison's voice went from jovial to venomous in a heartbeat. How many times do I have to teach you how to make proper coffee, girl? I made it the same way I always. Are you talking back to me? The question hung in the air like a blade. Cassidy's face went pale. No, Sheriff. I'll make a fresh pot right now. She turned toward the coffee maker, moving fast, and that's when it happened. Her elbow knocked Morrison's cup, sending it skittering across the counter. Coffee splashed onto Morrison's pristine uniform shirt. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison stood slowly. Very slowly. The kind of slow that meant violence was coming, and everyone knew it, and nobody could stop it. You clumsy bitch, he said quietly. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Cassidy backed up, her hands raised, already knowing what was coming. Morrison's hand shot out faster than a snake strike. He grabbed Cassidy by the front of her uniform and yanked her forward, her feet barely touching the ground. His other hand came up, and the slap, when it connected with her face, sounded like a firecracker going off. Cassidy cried out. Her head snapped to the side. When Morrison released her, she stumbled backward, catching herself on the counter, one hand pressed to her reddening cheek, tears already streaming down her face. Maybe next time you'll be more careful, Morrison said, examining his hand like he'd gotten dirt on it. Now clean up this mess. That's when Jackson stood up. The scrape of his chair against the linoleum floor seemed unnaturally loud. Every eye in the diner turned to him. Morrison's deputies straightened hands, moving instinctively toward their sidearms. The sheriff himself turned, his expression shifting from satisfied cruelty to annoyance. Something you want to say, friend? Morrison asked, his voice dripping with false politeness. Jackson took 3 steps toward the counter. His boots echoed in the silence. He didn't hurry, didn't rush. Just moved with the calm, inexorable purpose of a man who'd made up his mind about something, and nothing in heaven or hell was going to change it. I think, Jackson said, his voice quiet and level, that you need to apologize to the lady. For a moment, Morrison just stared at him. Then he laughed, a big, booming laugh that his deputies immediately echoed. Apologize to her! He jerked his thumb at Cassidy, who stood frozen behind the counter, her eyes wide with terror. For what? Disciplining an employee who can't do her job. For putting your hands on her, Jackson said. His voice hadn't changed, still quiet, still level, but something in it made the deputies' laughter die in their throats. Morrison's smile faded. He took a step toward Jackson, using his height advantage, getting into Jackson's space the way bullies do when they're used to people backing down. You don't know who you're talking to, do you? I know exactly who I'm talking to. Then you know I'm the law in this town. What I say goes. What I do goes. And what I do with Cassidy is none of your goddamn business. Morrison's voice had gone cold now, all the false joviality stripped away. This was the real Frank Morrison, the one Cassidy saw every day. Jackson didn't move, didn't step back, didn't look away. That badge doesn't give you the right to hit women. This badge gives me the right to do whatever the hell I want. Morrison tapped his chest where the sheriff's star gleamed. And you're nobody, just another biker trash passing through my town. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit your ass back down, finish your coffee, and get the hell out of Redemption before I find a reason to run you in. We clear? No, Jackson said. That one word seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Morrison's face went red. What did you say to me? I said no, you're not going to threaten me. You're not going to intimidate me. And you sure as hell aren't going to hit that woman again. Not while I'm standing here. Rollins, the bald deputy, moved around the counter, his hand on his pistol. Sheriff, you want me to handle this? Morrison held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Jackson's face. Not yet. I want to hear what this asshole has to say first. He leaned in close enough that Jackson could smell the coffee on his breath. You think you're tough. You think because you wear that leather and ride that bike, that you're some kind of badass. I've broken men twice your size, old man. I've made bikers like you disappear into the desert where nobody ever finds them. So I'm going to give you one more chance. Walk away right now while you still can. Jackson smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who'd heard this speech 100 times before and never believed it once. You're right about one thing, Jackson said. I am a biker. Been one for 38 years. Hell's Angels. Oakland chapter originally, though, I've ridden with brothers from Frisco to Phoenix to Albuquerque. I've seen men like you in every two-bit town from California to Texas. Little kings and little kingdoms hiding behind badges and guns because, without them, you are nothing but cowards. Morrison's face had gone from red to purple, his hands clenched into fists. You're going to regret. I've buried 47 brothers, Jackson continued, his voice still quiet but filled with something dark and heavy. Men better than you'll ever be. I've been shot 3 times, stabbed twice, and run over by a goddamn semi-truck outside Tucson. I've done time in 5 different prisons, and I'm still here, still standing. So when you threaten me, Sheriff, all I hear is noise. The mustached Deputy Crawford, according to his name tag, drew his pistol. That's enough. On the ground now. Jackson didn't move, didn't even glance at the gun pointed at his chest. He kept his eyes locked on Morrison. You gonna let your boys do your fighting, Sheriff, that how it works. You hit women and hide behind deputies. Something snapped in Morrison's face. The careful control, the measured intimidation, it all fell away, leaving nothing but raw, primal fury. His hand shot out, grabbing the coffee pot from the counter. For a second, Jackson thought he was going to swing it at his head. Instead, Morrison hurled it at the wall behind Jackson, where it exploded in a shower of glass and hot coffee. You want to know how it works, Morrison roared. In this town, I am the law. What I say is gospel. And when some biker piece of shit rolls in here and disrespects me in my own town in front of my people, this is what happens. His fist came out of nowhere, or it would have seemed like nowhere to someone who hadn't spent decades in bar fights and back alley brawls. Jackson saw it coming a mile away. He could have dodged it, could have blocked it, could have countered it with any number of moves that would have put Morrison on the floor. Instead, he took it. The punch caught him on the jaw, snapping his head to the side. Pain exploded through his face. He tasted copper. Blood filled his mouth. But he didn't go down, didn't stumble. When he turned his head back to face Morrison, he was smiling again, blood coating his teeth. That the best you got? Jackson asked. Morrison hit him again. And again. 3 more punches, each one landing solidly, each one sending fresh waves of pain through Jackson's skull. The deputies moved in Rollins, driving a fist into Jackson's kidney from behind, while Crawford brought his pistol down on Jackson's shoulder. Jackson dropped to one knee. Blood dripped from his mouth onto the dirty linoleum floor. His vision swam, his ears rang. From somewhere far away, he heard Cassidy screaming. Stop, please stop. He didn't do anything. Morrison grabbed Jackson by his hair, yanking his head back, forcing him to look up. You see what happens when you disrespect me. You see what happens when you challenge me in my town. He leaned down, his face inches from Jackson's. You're nobody. You're nothing. And nobody's coming to save you. Jackson's split lips curved into a bloody smile. You sure about that, Sheriff? Morrison frowned. What? That's when they heard it. Distant at first, easy to miss if you weren't listening for it, but growing louder, closer, the unmistakable rumble of motorcycles. Not one, not two, many. Morrison's head snapped toward the window. His deputies turned hands, moving to their weapons. Even through the dusty glass, they could see them coming, a line of Harley-Davidsons, stretching down the highway 20 bikes strong, rolling into redemption like thunder made visible. The lead bike bore a rider in full colors, the Hells Angels' death's head patch prominent on his back. Next to him rode another, and another. The convoy filled the street, engines roaring in perfect synchronization, a wall of chrome and leather and barely contained violence. They pulled into the diner's parking lot in a perfect formation, engines rumbling like caged beasts. As one, they cut their motors. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. 20 men dismounted. Every one of them wore full colors. Every one of them was built like they'd spent their lives doing hard work and hard time. They ranged in age from late 20s to past 60, but they all had the same look in their eyes, the look of men who'd seen the worst the world had to offer and decided they weren't afraid of it. The lead rider pulled off his helmet. His name was Marcus Ghost Delacroix, and Jackson had known him for 23 years. Ghost was 6'4", built like a linebacker, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He'd gotten that scar in a knife fight with a Mongol in Stockton, and the Mongol hadn't walked away. Ghost looked through the diner window and locked eyes with Jackson, still kneeling on the floor with blood dripping from his face. Then Ghost looked at Morrison, at the deputies with their guns drawn, at Cassidy cowering behind the counter. He smiled. It was not a comforting expression. "Gentlemen," Ghost said, his voice carrying through the closed door like he was standing right next to them. "I think we need to have a conversation." Morrison's face had gone from purple to white. His hand moved toward his radio. "You bikers need to move along. This is official police business." "Official police business," Ghost repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words. "Is that what you call beating a brother while he's on his knees?" He turned to the man beside him, a massive black man named Terrence T-Bone Washington, who'd done 10 years in Pelican Bay for manslaughter. "Did you ever seen official police business look like that?" "Can't say I have, Ghost," T-Bone rumbled. "Looks more like 3 cowards jumping one man to me." "That's what I thought." Ghost took a step toward the diner door. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to let our brother go. You're going to apologize to the lady, and then we're going to have a discussion about how law enforcement works in civilized society." Crawford raised his pistol, pointing it at Ghost through the window. "Take another step, and I'll drop you where you stand." 20 hands moved to 20 waistbands. 20 guns appeared like magic, all of them pointed at the diner. Not threateningly, not aggressively, just matter-of-factly, the way a carpenter might pick up a hammer. "Son," Ghost said, his voice suddenly very tired and very old. "I was in firefights in Fallujah when you were still in diapers. I've been shot at by people who actually knew what they were doing. You really want to start something you can't finish." Morrison's radio crackled. A panicked voice came through. "Sheriff, we've got a situation at the station. Someone just sent the entire department a video file. It's... Sheriff, you need to see this." Morrison grabbed the radio. "Not now. Dispatch." "Sheriff, it's footage from the diner. From today. From right now. It's streaming live on the internet. We're getting calls from news stations. CNN just called. Sheriff, the whole world is watching." Morrison's eyes went to the corners of the diner ceiling. Their tiny, almost invisible, were camera lenses he'd never noticed before. How long had they been there? Who had installed them? Jackson, still on his knees, spat blood onto the floor and looked up at Morrison. "Tommy Calabrese," he said quietly. "You remember Tommy, old biker who came through here about 6 months ago? Asked too many questions about Cassidy's bruises? The one who disappeared after you and your boys took him for a ride into the desert?" Morrison's face went ashen. "Tommy was my brother," Jackson continued, "and before you killed him, he set up those cameras. Been streaming everything that happens in this diner for the last 4 months. Every slap, every threat, every time you put your hands on Cassidy. It's all out there now, Sheriff." The whole world knows what kind of man you really are. The radio crackled again. Sheriff, the FBI just called. They're sending agents from Phoenix, ETA, 2 hours. Morrison looked around wildly at his deputies who were slowly lowering their weapons and backing away from him. At the bikers outside, still holding their guns with professional calm. At Cassidy, who for the first time since Jackson had walked in was standing up straight, something like hope flickering in her haunted eyes. "This isn't over," Morrison whispered. Jackson stood slowly wiping blood from his mouth. "Yeah, it is. You're done, Morrison. This town is done with you. And if you ever lay a hand on Cassidy or any other woman again, these men outside won't wait for the FBI. They'll handle you themselves, and nobody will ever find what's left." Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. Rollins grabbed his wrist. "Don't, Frank. It's over. We're done." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Morrison jerked his arm free, turned and stalked toward the back door of the diner. His deputies followed, but not before Crawford shot Jackson a look that was half respect, half pure fear. The back door slammed. An engine started. Tires squealed on asphalt. Ghost opened the front door and walked in, his brothers following. They filled the small diner, making it seem even smaller. Ghost walked straight to Jackson, looking him over with a critical eye. "You look like hell, brother." "Feel like it too." Jackson grinned, wincing as the motion split his lip wider. "Tommy would have been proud." Ghost's voice went rough. "That old bastard always did like making the big gestures." "Yeah, he did." Jackson felt something twist in his chest. Tommy was gone. Really gone. But his final act had just freed an entire town. Cassidy appeared at Jackson's elbow, holding a clean bar towel filled with ice. Her hands were still shaking, but her eyes were different now. Clearer. "Here," she said softly. "For your face." Jackson took the ice, holding her gaze. "You okay?" She laughed, and it came out half sob. "I don't know. Ask me in a week." She looked around at the 20 bikers crowding her diner. Are you all really?" "Hell's Angels," Jackson confirmed. "Every one of us? And we don't leave family behind. Tommy told me about you before he died. Made me promise to look after you. So that's what I'm here to do." Tears spilled down Cassidy's cheeks. "I don't even know what to say." "Don't need to say anything," Ghost rumbled. "Just need to know you safe here. You got somewhere to go, family." Cassidy looked around the diner at the place that had been her prison for so long. "I don't know. I've been here so long, I don't even remember what free feels like." T-Bone stepped forward. His wife ran a women's shelter in Phoenix, he explained. They had space, resources, people who specialized in helping women rebuild their lives after situations like this. Jackson watched Cassidy's face as T-Bone spoke, watched hope and fear, and 100 other emotions play across her features. This was the beginning, he realized, not the end. Morrison was finished, but the work of healing for Cassidy, for this town, for all the people who'd lived under his thumb for so long, was just starting. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. Not local police, something bigger. The FBI maybe, or state troopers, the cavalry coming at last. Ghost clapped Jackson on the shoulder. "Hell of a thing you did today, brother." Jackson looked at the blood on the floor at Cassidy, trying to smile through her tears at his brother standing in a diner in the middle of nowhere because one of their own had called for help. "Just doing what Tommy would have done," he said quietly. "Taking care of family." And in that moment, as the sirens grew closer and the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of the Desert Rose Diner, Jackson Ironside Reeves felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still some justice left in this broken world. You just had to be willing to stand up and fight for it. Usad Parto lưu ý viết 3.000 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Claude responded. The sirens died outside as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the diner doors opening before the vehicles even stopped moving. The sirens died outside as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the diner doors opening before the vehicles even stopped moving. Federal agents poured out vests marked FBI in bright yellow letters, faces all business and authority. Jackson watched through the window as a woman in her 40s stepped out of the lead vehicle. Dark hair pulled back tight, eyes scanning the scene with the precision of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. "That's Special Agent Victoria Brennan," Ghost muttered, standing beside Jackson. "Know her from a case in Oakland, back in 2009. She's fair, but she's hard. Doesn't bend rules for anyone. Jackson pressed the ice harder against his swelling jaw. Good. Morrison needs someone who won't bend. Brennan walked toward the diner, two agents flanking her. She pushed through the door and stopped taking in the 20 bikers crowding the small space, Jackson's bloodied face, Cassidy still clutching the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Which one of you is Jackson Reeves? Brennan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That'd be me. Jackson lowered the ice pack. Brennan's eyes narrowed as she took in his injuries. You need medical attention. I need Morrison in handcuffs more. Already done. State troopers picked him up 2 miles down Route 60 trying to make a run for the state line. His deputies surrendered at the station. She pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens. I've been watching the live stream for the last 40 minutes. Hell of a show you put on. Wasn't a show, Jackson said quietly. Was justice. Justice is what I'm here to provide. Brennan's gaze shifted to Cassidy. Ms. Warren, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have victim advocates waiting, and I need your full statement about Sheriff Morrison's abuse. Cassidy's face went pale. I can't. If I testify, he'll kill me. You don't know what he's capable of. He's capable of nothing anymore. Brennan interrupted, her voice softening just slightly. The footage we have is damning enough, but your testimony will ensure he never wears a badge again, never hurts anyone again. She's right, Cass. Jackson turned to face her. Tommy died to give you this chance. Don't let his death mean nothing. Cassidy's eyes filled with tears again. I'm scared. Being scared means you're still alive, T-Bone rumbled from across the room. Means you still got fight in you. Below, my wife, Linda, she'll be there with you every step. You won't be alone. Brennan nodded. We have protective custody arrangements, safe houses, resources you didn't have before. Morrison's network is already crumbling. 3 deputies have turned state's evidence in the last hour alone. 3. Ghost's eyebrows shot up. How many dirty cops does this town have? Had, Brennan corrected. Past tense, 7 deputies total, all on Morrison's payroll. Town council president, 2 county judges, the mayor. This is bigger than one corrupt sheriff. This is systematic. Jackson felt something cold settle in his stomach. How long has this been going on? Based on preliminary evidence, 12 years, maybe longer. Brennan swiped through more screens on her tablet. Morrison's been running redemption like his personal fiefdom since 2014. Extortion assault evidence, tampering witness intimidation. We've found offshore accounts, property deeds under false names, connections to drug trafficking through Mexico. Your friend Tommy wasn't the first person to disappear after asking too many questions. The diner went silent. Even the bikers men who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer looked shaken. How many others? Jackson's voice was barely a whisper. Brennan's jaw tightened. We don't know yet, but we've got cadaver dogs on the way and ground-penetrating radar. There's a lot of desert around Redemption. Cassidy made a sound like a wounded animal. She slid down the counter, her legs giving out, and would have hit the floor if Jackson hadn't caught her. She was shaking, her whole body trembling like she was coming apart at the seams. Tommy, she whispered. Oh God, Tommy. He came to help me and Morrison killed him. This is my fault. This is all my fault. No, Jackson held her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. This is Morrison's fault. Not yours, never yours. But if I'd been stronger, if I'd fought back, You survived, Jackson said firmly. That takes more strength than fighting. You survived until someone could help you. That's what Tommy wanted. That's why he died. So you could live. Ghost crouched down beside them. Your friend Tommy was a good man. Came through our clubhouse in Phoenix about 8 months back, told us he was checking on a situation in Redemption. Said there was a woman in trouble and he couldn't let it go. We offered to ride with him. He said no, said he didn't want to bring heat down until he had proof. Ghost's voice went rough. Should have insisted. Should have made him take backup. He was stubborn, Cassidy said, almost smiling through her tears. Wouldn't listen to anyone once he'd made up his mind about something. Sounds like most bikers I know. Ghost stood offering Cassidy his hand, but he was smart too. Set up those cameras before Morrison even knew he was a threat. Been recording everything for months. That's not just evidence. That's premeditation. Tommy knew he might not make it out, so he made sure the truth would. Brennan's radio crackled. She stepped away, speaking in low tones. When she came back, her expression was grim. We just got word from the medical examiner. They found human remains in the desert about 15 miles east of here. Shallow grave partially exposed by recent flash flooding. Early indicators suggest the body's been there less than a year. Jackson felt his chest tighten. Tommy, we'll need dental records to confirm, but based on the personal effects found with the body, Brennan hesitated, something like sympathy flickering across her professional mask. A Hells Angels ring, Oakland chapter, engraved with the initials TC. The diner erupted. Bikers surged forward, voices raised, fists clenched. Ghost grabbed Jackson's arm, the only thing keeping him from charging out the door. T-Bone was shouting something about desert justice. 3 other brothers were already heading for their bikes, faces dark with rage. Stand down. Brennan's voice cut through the chaos like a gunshot. Everyone stand down right now. You expect us to just stand here while Tommy's lying in a hole in the desert? Ghost's voice was deadly quiet, which was somehow more terrifying than shouting. While the man who killed him sits in a cell eating 3 hot meals a day, I expect you to let justice take its course, Brennan shot back. Because if any of you lay a hand on Morrison, he walks. His lawyers will claim prejudice, intimidation, tainted evidence. Is that what you want? You want him free because you couldn't control yourselves. Jackson pulled free from Ghost's grip. She's right. The hell she is. She's right, Jackson repeated louder this time. Tommy wouldn't want us throwing away his sacrifice because we got stupid. He did this the smart way. Cameras. Evidence, the law. We're going to honor that. By doing nothing. T-Bone's voice shook with fury. By making sure Morrison spends the rest of his life in a cage. Jackson looked around at his brothers, at men who'd been riding together for decades, men who'd bled together and buried brothers together. Tommy died for this, for justice. Real justice, not the kind Morrison dealt out. We owe him better than revenge. We owe him a conviction. Ghost's jaw worked, muscles jumping under his scarred skin. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and angry. Fine, but if Morrison walks on a technicality, all bets are off. He won't walk. Brennan's voice carried absolute certainty. I've got enough to put him away for 3 lifetimes, and that's just from this morning's footage. Once we start digging into his financials, his communications, his network. She shook her head. Frank Morrison is never seeing freedom again. Cassidy stood on shaking legs. I want to see him. Everyone turned to stare at her. Cass, I don't think that's a good idea, Jackson started. I don't care what you think. Cassidy's voice was stronger now, steadier. He's controlled me for 2 years. 2 years of beatings and threats and living in constant fear. I want to look him in the eye while he's in handcuffs. I want him to know he doesn't scare me anymore. Brennan studied her for a long moment. You're sure, I'm sure. All right, I can arrange that, but just you and me in the room, no one else. I want Jackson there. Cassidy turned to him. Please, I need someone who understands. Jackson looked at Brennan, who hesitated, then nodded curtly. Fine, but any violence, any threats, and you're both out. Clear cut done. Crystal. The Redemption Sheriff's Department was a squat brick building that looked like it had been built in the 60s and never updated. The parking lot was full of federal vehicles, now agents moving in and out with boxes of evidence, hard drives, file folders. Local cops stood in small clusters, faces shell-shocked, realizing their entire department had been built on corruption and lies. Brennan led them through the back entrance down a hallway that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Morrison was in the last cell on the left, sitting on a metal bench bolted to the wall, still wearing his uniform, though they'd taken his badge and his belt and his dignity. He looked up when they entered, and for just a second, Jackson saw the fear in his eyes before the sheriff's mask slammed back into place. Well, well, Morrison's voice was all false bravado. Come to gloat. No, Cassidy said, stepping forward. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I came to tell you that you don't own me anymore. You never owned me. You just made me think you did. Morrison laughed, but it sounded hollow. You think this changes anything. You think because they caught me on a bad day that suddenly you're free, girl. I've got lawyers. I've got connections. I'll be out of here by... You killed Tommy Calabrese. Cassidy's words hit like bullets. You took him out to the desert and you killed him because he tried to help me. Because he saw what you really are. Morrison's face went still. I don't know what you're talking about. They found his body, Jackson said quietly, about an hour ago. And when they exhume it, when they run the forensics, they're going to find your DNA on it, your fingerprints, your mistakes, because you're not as smart as you think you are, Morrison. You're just a coward who hid behind a badge. You've got nothing, Morrison spat, but his voice cracked. No witnesses, no evidence. That desert's too big, too empty. You can't prove. Actually, we can. Brennan stepped forward, holding up her tablet. See, Sheriff, when you're a corrupt cop for 12 years, you get sloppy. We've already pulled your cell phone records. Know where you were the night Tommy Calabrese disappeared. Right in the area where we found his body. Know who else's cell phone pinged off that same tower that night, Deputy Rollins and Deputy Crawford. All three of you in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. Morrison's face drained of color. And that's just the beginning, Brennan continued. We've got your truck's GPS records showing 6 trips to that same location over the past year. We've got text messages between you and your deputies discussing taking care of problems. We've got witness statements from 3 different people who saw you driving Tommy's motorcycle into your garage the night he vanished. She leaned closer to the bars. You're done, Morrison. Completely done. Morrison lunged at the bars, grabbing them with white-knuckled hands. You think you're heroes. You think you're better than me. I kept this town safe. I kept the drugs out, kept the gangs out. You were the gang, Jackson interrupted. You were the thing people needed protection from. Cassidy stepped right up to the cell, close enough to touch the bars, close enough that Morrison could have grabbed her if they hadn't been there. I hope you rot, she said simply. I hope every single day in prison feels like a year. I hope you never forget what you did. And I hope that when you're old and dying in that cell, the last thing you remember is this moment, when you lost everything, when everyone finally saw what you really are. She turned and walked away, her head held high for the first time since Jackson had met her. He followed, but not before catching Morrison's eyes one last time. Tommy was my brother, Jackson said quietly, and the only reason I'm not coming through these bars right now is because he was a better man than both of us. He believed in justice, real justice. So I'm going to honor that. I'm going to let the system do its job. He paused. But if you somehow walk, if some technicality or some bent judge lets you out, you remember this. We are everywhere. We never forget, and we take care of our own. He left Morrison sitting in that cell, and as they walked back down the hallway, Jackson heard something that might have been crying or might have been cursing, echoing off the concrete walls. Outside, the desert sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The brothers were gathered in the parking lot waiting. Ghost looked up as Jackson emerged. How'd it go? It went, Jackson said. Morrison's finished. Brennan's got him dead to rights. Good. Ghost pulled out his phone, staring at it for a moment. Just got word from the club president. Tommy's family in Oakland wants to know when they can claim the body. Wants to know if we're doing a full funeral, colors and all. Jackson felt something crack inside his chest. Yeah, full funeral. Tommy earned it. T-Bone stepped forward. We're staying then until it's done. We're staying, Jackson confirmed. Not just for the funeral, for Cassidy, for this town. Morrison might be locked up, but his network's still out there. People who profited from his corruption, people who looked the other way, people who might want revenge for their meal ticket getting arrested. Agreed. Ghost looked around at the gathered brothers. We set up a rotation. 5 guys stay in town at all times until the trial's over. We make sure Cassidy stays safe. We make sure nobody tries anything stupid. That could take months, one of the younger brothers pointed out. Federal trials move slow. Then we'll be here for months. Ghost's voice left no room for argument. That's what brothers do. We show up and we stay. Jackson walked away from the group, pulling out his own phone. He had calls to make. Tommy's sister in Oakland, the club president, his own demons waiting patiently for him to fall apart. He found a quiet spot behind the building, leaning against the sun-warmed brick, and let himself feel it, the grief he'd been holding back since Ghost told him about the body. Tommy was really gone. Not missing, not hiding, dead, murdered, buried in a shallow grave in the middle of nowhere by a man who thought a badge made him God. You okay? Cassidy's voice soft behind him. Jackson wiped his eyes roughly. Yeah, just needed a minute. She stood beside him, not touching, just being present. I never got to thank him. Tommy. He'd come into the diner every few days, always asking if I was all right, always offering to help. I kept saying no, kept telling him to leave it alone, but he wouldn't listen. Tommy never listened to anyone. He said he had a friend, someone who'd come if things got bad. I didn't believe him, thought it was just talk. She looked up at Jackson. But you came. You really came. Brothers don't leave brothers behind, and Tommy considered you family. Why? The question came out raw. Why would he care about some waitress he barely knew? Why would he risk his life for me? Jackson thought about how to answer that. You know what the club motto is? When we do right, nobody remembers. When we do wrong, nobody forgets. People see the patches and the bikes, and they think they know what we are. Criminals, outlaws, thugs. And yeah, some of us have done bad things, lived hard lives. But the core of it, the heart of what we are, we're brothers. We're family. And family protects family even if it costs everything. Tommy paid everything. Yeah, he did. Jackson's voice went rough again. But he didn't pay for nothing. You're alive. Morrison's done. This town's going to heal. That's not nothing, Cassidy. That's everything. She was quiet for a long moment. What happens to me now? That's up to you. T-Bone's wife runs a shelter in Phoenix. Good place, good people. They'll help you get back on your feet, find work, find a place to live. Or if you want to stay here, rebuild your life in redemption, we'll make sure you're safe while you do it. I don't know if I can stay here. Too many memories, too much pain. Then you leave. Start over somewhere new. That's okay too. Cassidy nodded slowly. Your friend Tommy, the last time I saw him, he told me something. He said the world's got more good people in it than bad. Sometimes you just gotta survive long enough to find them. I didn't believe him then, but maybe he was right. He usually was. Jackson pushed off from the wall. Come on, Brennan's going to want to start taking statements, and the sooner we get this done, the sooner we can start the real work. What's the real work? Healing, grieving, moving forward. Jackson managed a tired smile, the boring stuff that comes after the dramatic rescue. They walked back around the building together. The sun had nearly set now, the desert cooling rapidly. In that way, it does the temperature dropping 30 degrees in 30 minutes. The brothers were still gathered in the parking lot, some sitting on their bikes, others standing in small groups talking quietly. When Jackson and Cassidy appeared, Ghost looked up and nodded. Brennan wants us all at the Federal Building in Phoenix tomorrow morning. Full statement starting at 0800. We'll be there. Jackson looked around at his brothers. Listen up. I know we're all hurting. I know we all want blood for what Morrison did to Tommy. But we do this the right way. We cooperate with the feds. We give them everything they need to build an airtight case. And we trust that justice will be served. And if it's not, someone called from the back. Jackson's smile was cold. Then we'll have a different conversation. But not before. Tommy believed in doing things right. We're going to honor that belief. The brothers nodded, accepting it. They'd follow Jackson's lead because he'd been Tommy's friend, and because they all knew grief made people do stupid things if they weren't careful. Brennan emerged from the building phone, pressed to her ear, face tight with concentration. She ended the call and walked over. Change of plans. I need Cassidy at the Phoenix field office tonight, not tomorrow. We've got a judge on standby to take her protective custody order, and I don't want to risk waiting. I'll drive her, T-Bone offered immediately. Linda's already got a room set up at the shelter. I'll ride along, Jackson said, just to make sure she gets there safe. Brennan looked like she wanted to argue, then nodded. Fine, but you stay outside the shelter. No men allowed inside except staff, house rules. Understood. 30 minutes later, Jackson was on his bike following T-Bone's pickup truck down Highway 60, heading west toward Phoenix. Cassidy sat in the passenger seat, small and lost-looking, clutching a plastic bag containing the few possessions she'd grabbed from her apartment above the diner. Everything she owned in the world fit in one grocery bag. That told Jackson everything he needed to know about the life Morrison had forced her into. The ride took 2 hours. The city lights of Phoenix gradually appeared on the horizon, growing brighter as they got closer. Jackson had always hated cities, too much noise, too many people, too little open sky. But tonight the city felt like salvation, like safety, like the promise of something better, waiting just ahead. The shelter was in a quiet residential neighborhood, An unassuming house that looked like every other house on the block. That was intentional. Women came here to escape, to hide, to heal. The last thing they needed was a building that advertised what it was. Linda Washington met them at the door. She was a big woman, solid and warm, with kind eyes and an air of absolute competence. She took one look at Cassidy and immediately pulled her into a hug. "Oh, honey," Linda murmured. "You're safe now. You're really safe." Cassidy started crying again, and Linda led her inside, still talking in that low, soothing voice. T-Bone watched them go, something soft and proud in his expression. "She's good at this," Jackson said quietly. "Best there is. Been running this place for 8 years. Helped hundreds of women get their lives back." T-Bone looked at Jackson. "Your girl's in good hands." "She's not my girl. I just met her today." "Tommy's girl, then?" "Same difference. You're his brother, so you're looking out for his people. That's how it works." Jackson couldn't argue with that. They stood on the porch for a while, not talking, just being present. Finally, Linda came back out. She settled in her room. "Going to sleep, I think. Girl's exhausted." "She tell you everything?" T-Bone asked. "Enough. She'll tell me more when she's ready." Linda looked at Jackson with sharp, assessing eyes. "You the one who stood up to that sheriff?" "Yeesh." "Yeah. Tommy told me about you. Said you were one of the good ones. Said if he ever got in real trouble, you were the brother he'd call." Jackson's throat tightened. He never got the chance to call. "No, but he set things up so you'd come anyway. That's Tommy for you, always planning 3 steps ahead." Linda's expression softened. "He cared about that girl, talked about her every time he called. Said she reminded him of his daughter." Jackson hadn't known Tommy had a daughter. There was so much he hadn't known, so much they'd never gotten to talk about. That's what death did. It left conversations unfinished, questions unanswered, 1,000 small mysteries that would never be solved. "We should go," T-Bone said gently. "Let the women rest." They rode back to Redemption in silence, arriving just after midnight. The town was quiet, most windows dark, the streets empty, except for a few federal vehicles still parked outside the sheriff's station. The brothers had set up camp at a motel on the edge of town, taking over the entire second floor. Jackson found Ghost in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette and staring at the stars. Cassidy settled. "Yeah, she's safe." "Good." Ghost took a long drag. "Got some news while you were gone. Brennan found 3 more bodies. Different locations, all within 50 miles of here. All buried in the last 5 years. Jackson felt sick. Jesus. Yeah, Morrison wasn't just corrupt. He was a goddamn serial killer. Ghost flicked ash onto the pavement. "How many people you think he murdered before Tommy? I don't want to know. FBI thinks there might be more. They're bringing in cadaver dogs tomorrow, searching a 100-mile radius." Ghost's voice was hollow. "This is going to be bad, Jackie. Really bad. When the news gets out, when people realize what Morrison was doing all these years, the town's going to tear itself apart." Jackson finished the thought. "Everyone who looked the other way, everyone who enabled him, everyone who benefited from his corruption, they're all going to be suspects. That's why we're staying, to keep the peace, to make sure justice happens the right way, not the mob way." Ghost looked at him. "You good with that? Could be weeks, could be months." "I'm good with it." Jackson didn't hesitate. "Tommy died for this. We're seeing it through to the end." Ghost nodded and stubbed out his cigarette. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." But Jackson didn't sleep. He lay in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Tommy and Cassidy and Morrison and all the broken pieces of this broken town, thinking about justice and revenge and the thin line between them, thinking about his brother's 20 men who dropped everything to ride into the desert because one of their own had been killed. This was family. This was what it meant to be a Hell's Angel, not the violence or the reputation or the outlaw mystique. Just this showing up when it mattered, standing together against injustice, refusing to let a brother's death mean nothing. Outside, another motorcycle rumbled into the parking lot. Then another. More brothers arriving from other chapters, coming to pay respects, coming to help however they could. By dawn, there would be 40 bikes in that lot. By the funeral, there would be hundreds, because that's what family did. They showed up, they stood together, and they made damn sure the world remembered what their brother had died for. Jackson's phone rang at 5 in the morning, dragging him from the first real sleep he'd managed in 48 hours. Ghost's voice came through, rough and urgent. Get dressed. We got a problem. Jackson was pulling on his boots before Ghost even finished the sentence. What kind of problem? The kind with guns. Meet me at the diner, now. The Desert Rose looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, all shadows and broken glass. Someone had put a brick through the front window during the night. Spray paint covered the door, crude letters spelling out words Jackson didn't need to read to understand. The message was clear: collaborators weren't welcome in Redemption. Ghost stood beside his bike, arms crossed, face dark. 3 other brothers flanked him, all wearing their colors, all armed. Inside the diner, Jackson could see movement through the shattered window. Who's in there? Old man named Eugene, owns the place. Says someone called him at 4:30, told him Cassidy better not come back if she knows what's good for her. Then they hung up, and 10 minutes later, this happened. Jackson pushed through the damaged door. Eugene sat at the counter, a man in his 70s with liver-spotted hands and watery eyes. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where flying glass had caught him. You okay? Eugene looked up, his face a map of fear and exhaustion. They're going to kill me. Morrison's people. They think I helped set him up because I let Tommy install those cameras. Did you know about the cameras? No, but they don't care about the truth. They just want someone to blame. Eugene's hands shook as he wiped blood frost from his face. I've owned this diner for 32 years. Raised my kids here. Buried my wife from money I made here. And now they're going to burn it down because I didn't protect a monster. Nobody's burning anything, Jackson said quietly. Not while we're here. You can't stay forever. We can stay long enough. Ghost entered, his boots crunching on broken glass. Just got word from Brennan. 3 more bodies found overnight. That makes 8 total. All women between 25 and 40. All reported missing over the past decade. All buried within 70 miles of Redemption. Eugene made a sound like he'd been punched. Oh God. Oh my God. Jenny Martinez. She worked here 6 years ago. Just disappeared one day. Morrison said she probably ran off with some trucker, and we believed him. We all believed him. Jenny was one of the bodies, Jackson asked. Brennan's running DNA now, but the timeline fits. Waitress, mid-30s, vanished in 2020. Ghost's voice was flat, clinical, the only way to talk about horror without drowning in it. How many waitresses worked here over the years, Eugene? I don't know. Dozen, 15 maybe? This town's dying. Young people leave as soon as they can. Only ones who stay are the ones with nowhere else to go. Eugene's eyes widened. Wait, Sarah. Sarah Chen worked here in 2018. Chinese girl, real pretty, real sweet. Disappeared after her shift one night. We found her car abandoned on Route 60. Morrison said it looked like she'd been picked up by someone. Said probably trafficking, probably across the border by now. When did she disappear? March, late March 2018. Ghost was already on his phone texting Brennan. The response came back in seconds. Brennan says one of the bodies had dental work consistent with Asian heritage. They're checking missing persons reports now. Jackson watched the old man's face crumble, watched 30 years of trust and willful ignorance collapse in real time. You couldn't have known. I should have known. We all should have known. Eugene looked around his destroyed diner. He was killing women and we were serving him coffee, making small talk about the weather, laughing at his jokes. He was good at hiding what he was, Ghost said. Predators always are. That's how they survive. The door opened again. A woman in her 50s entered, saw the damage and stopped dead. Eugene, oh my God, what happened? Helen, go home. What happened? Helen's voice rose. Was this Morrison's people? Helen, please, my daughter worked here. Helen's scream cut through the morning air like a siren. Rebecca worked here in 2019 and she disappeared, and Morrison said she ran away, but she didn't, did she? She didn't run away at all. Ghost stepped forward, hands raised, voice gentle. Ma'am, we don't know anything for certain yet. The FBI is investigating. Don't you lie to me. Helen lunged at Eugene and Jackson barely caught her in time. She fought against his grip, screaming, crying, a mother's grief erupting after years of forced hope. You knew. You all knew something was wrong, and nobody did anything. My baby girl is dead, and you did nothing. 2 more people appeared in the doorway. Then 4. Then a dozen. Word was spreading through Redemption like wildfire, carried on phone calls and text messages, and the kind of small-town gossip that travels faster than light. Missing daughters, missing sisters, missing friends. All those unsolved disappearances that Morrison had explained away with practiced ease. Ghost pulled Jackson aside. This is getting out of control fast. We need to lock this down before it turns into a riot. How these people have a right to be angry. Angry's fine. Mob justice isn't. You see how they're looking at Eugene at the diner. They're looking for something to burn, someone to blame. Morrison's in a cell, so they're going to find the next best thing. Jackson looked at the growing crowd outside, saw the rage building in their faces, the desperate need to make someone pay for what had been done to their town. Ghost was right. This was a powder keg looking for a match. Call Brennan. Tell her we need federal partners here right now. Crowd control, official statements, something to give these people answers before they take matters into their own hands. Ghost was already dialing. Jackson turned back to Helen, who'd collapsed into a booth, sobbing into her hands. He sat across from her, waiting until her breathing steadied enough to hear him. My friend Tommy died trying to expose Morrison. Died trying to save Cassidy. If he were here right now, you know what he'd say. Helen looked up, her face ravaged by tears. What? He'd say the only way Morrison wins is if we tear ourselves apart. If we turn on each other instead of standing together. If we let him destroy this town, even from behind bars. How am I supposed to stand together with people who let my daughter die? Because they didn't know. None of them knew. Morrison was a professional. He knew how to lie, how to manipulate, how to make people see what he wanted them to see. That's what predators do. I should have pushed harder, should have demanded answers, should have nothing, Jackson said firmly. You did what any mother would do. You believed the authorities. You trusted the system. Morrison betrayed that trust. This is on him, not you, not Eugene, not anyone except the man sitting in that cell. Helen wiped her eyes. They found 8 bodies, 8 women. Is my Rebecca one of them? I don't know, but the FBI will tell you as soon as they know. They'll give you answers. They'll give you justice. Justice won't bring her back. No, it won't. But it'll make sure Morrison never hurts anyone else. That's worth something. Before Helen could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Jackson heard shouting, the revving of engines breaking glass. He bolted for the door just as a pickup truck accelerated down Main Street, 3 men in the bed holding baseball bats. They were heading for the sheriff's station. Shit! Ghost was already running for his bike. They're going after Morrison. Jackson and 5 other brothers roared after the truck bike, screaming through the quiet morning. The pickup screeched to a stop outside the sheriff's station, and the men poured out, bats swinging. They weren't going in for Morrison, Jackson realized. They were going for the deputies. Rollins and Crawford Morrison's right-hand men were being transferred to federal custody. The mob wanted them dead before they could talk. Federal agents swarmed out of the building, guns drawn, shouting orders. The mob hesitated, bats raised, caught between rage and self-preservation. Jackson put himself between the 2 groups, his arms spread wide. Stand down, and all of you, stand down right now. Get right out of the way. One of the men, a guy in his 30s with a Redemption high school jacket, pushed forward. Those bastards helped Morrison. They knew what he was doing. They helped him bury the bodies. So let them pay in court, Jackson said. Let them spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Don't throw your own lives away on them. My sister is dead because of them. The young man's voice cracked. Amy was 17, worked at the diner part-time after school, disappeared in 2021. Morrison said she was a runaway, said teenagers do that. We believed him, but she wasn't a runaway, was she? She was one of those bodies in the desert. Jackson felt something twist in his chest. I'm sorry, I'm so damn sorry, but this isn't the way. Then what is... The question came from a woman in the growing crowd, her voice raw with pain. What's the way to make this right, to make them pay for what they did? You stand together. You cooperate with the FBI. You make sure every single piece of evidence against Morrison and his people is airtight. You make sure they never see freedom again. And if the system fails, another voice, older, bitter, what if some fancy lawyer gets them off on a technicality? What if they walk, Ghost stepped forward beside Jackson? Then we'll have a different conversation. But not until we give justice a chance to work. These men wanted you to riot, wanted you to attack federal agents, to assault prisoners, make yourselves into criminals. Don't give them that satisfaction. Brennan emerged from the building, her voice carrying authority. Everyone listen to me. I understand you're angry. I understand you're hurt. But what you're about to do will only make things worse. Morrison and his deputies are going to federal prison. They're going to be tried, convicted, and sentenced. I have enough evidence to ensure they never breathe free air again. But if you attack them now, if you compromise this case, they walk. Is that what you want? The crowd wavered. The man in the high school jacket lowered his bat slowly. You swear they'll pay. You swear they'll get what they deserve. I swear on my career, on my badge, on everything I hold sacred, that I will see justice done. But I need you to trust the process. Can you do that? The silence stretched thin. Then the young man dropped his bat. It clattered on the asphalt, a sound impossibly loud. One by one, the others followed suit. The mob dissolved back into what it really was, broken people looking for something, anything, to make the pain stop. Brennan waited until the last person had dispersed before speaking. That was close, too close. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Ghost said. You've got 8 confirmed victims, and God knows how many more still buried out there. This town's a bomb waiting to go off. I know, that's why I'm requesting the National Guard. Should be here by tonight. Jackson felt the weight of that settle over him. National Guard, federal investigation, a town under martial law because one corrupt sheriff had turned it into his personal hunting ground. Where is Morrison now, he asked. Already transferred to the Federal Detention Center in Phoenix, along with Rollins and Crawford. The other 4 deputies are cooperating, giving statements, trying to cut deals. Brennan's expression was grim. What they're telling us makes what we already know look like nothing. How bad? Morrison's been running a protection racket for 12 years. Every business in Redemption paid him kickbacks. Anyone who refused got shut down or burned out. He was taking bribes from drug traffickers to let shipments through. He was selling guns out of the evidence locker. And the women, Brennan paused. The deputies are saying Morrison had a type. Blonde petite, late 20s to early 30s. Women who work service jobs. Women without family nearby. Women nobody would miss right away. He'd target them, isolate them, abuse them. Most of them would leave town if they could. But the ones who fought back, the ones who threatened to report him, ended up in the desert, Jackson finished. Yeah, and according to Crawford, there's at least 3 more burial sites we haven't found yet. We're talking double digits, Jackson. 15, maybe 20 victims. Ghost swore quietly. Jackson felt sick. This wasn't just corruption. This was a serial killer who'd used his badge as a hunting license. Tommy knew, Jackson said slowly. That's why he stayed. He figured out Morrison was killing women and he couldn't walk away. Your friend probably saved lives, Brennan said. If Morrison had gone unchecked for another 5 years, another 10, those cameras Tommy installed caught Morrison in the act of assault. That's what started this whole investigation. Without that footage, we might never have known. Jackson thought about Tommy, thought about how he'd spent his last months in Redemption watching gathering evidence, setting up his final play. Knowing he might not survive it, but doing it anyway because that's what brothers did. They stood up. They fought back. They protected the innocent even when it cost them everything. His phone rang, Linda's number. He answered immediately. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but Cassidy wants to talk to you, says it's urgent. Jackson put her on speaker. Cassidy's voice came through, shaky but determined. The other women, the ones Morrison killed. I knew some of them, worked with them. I might be able to help identify the bodies. Cassidy, you don't have to do that. You don't have to put yourself through. Yes, I do. Jenny Martinez was my friend. We worked the same shifts for 2 years. If she's one of those women, I need to help bring her home. I need to help her family have closure. Brennan leaned toward the phone. Mr. Warren, this is Agent Brennan. Are you certain about this viewing remains? Even photographs can be extremely traumatic. I'm already traumatized. At least this way, it means something. Jackson met Brennan's eyes. The agent nodded slowly. All right, I'll arrange it. But you'll have a counselor present. And if at any point you need to stop, I'll stop. But I'm doing this. For them, for all of them. The line went dead. Ghost looked at Jackson. That's a brave woman. That's a woman who's tired of being a victim, Jackson said. She wants to fight back. This is how she does it. They returned to the motel as the sun climbed higher, heat already building toward another scorching day. More brothers had arrived overnight. The parking lot was full of bikes, now 40 or 50 strong, chrome gleaming in the harsh light. Bikers sat in small groups, talking quietly, maintaining their vigil. Word had spread through the club network. Tommy's murder wasn't just Redemption's problem anymore. It was a club matter, and the club protected its own. Jackson found T-Bone working on his bike, adjusting the carburetor with practiced hands. Need to talk to you about something. T-Bone straightened, wiping grease on his jeans. Shoot. Morrison's people are scared. Scared people do stupid things. Cassidy's going to be testifying against him, which makes her a target. I need to know your wife's shelter is locked down tight. Linda's got security, cameras, panic buttons, reinforced doors. Nobody gets in without her knowing. T-Bone paused. But you're right to be worried. Morrison might be in a cell, but he's got connections. Money. People who owe him favors or fear him enough to do what he says. That's what I'm afraid of. Tell you what, I'll have 3 brothers posted outside the shelter 24/7. Rotating shifts, armed, watching the perimeter. Anyone comes near that place who shouldn't be there will know. Morrison's lawyers will call it intimidation. Let them. We're not breaking any laws, just exercising our right to peacefully assemble in a public space. That happens to be outside a women's shelter is coincidental. T-Bone grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Besides, you think any jury's going to convict us for protecting women from a serial killer's associates? Jackson couldn't argue with that logic. The day crawled past in a haze of heat and tension. FBI agents swarmed Redemption, interviewing residents, searching properties, digging up the desert. The National Guard arrived at 4 in the afternoon, setting up checkpoints at every road in and out of town. Redemption was effectively under quarantine. Nobody in, nobody out without federal approval. Ghost found Jackson at sunset, sitting outside his motel room, watching the desert turn gold and purple. Just heard from Oakland. Tommy's family wants the funeral in 3 days. They're flying his body back tomorrow. 3 days isn't enough time to investigate. They don't care. They want their brother home, want him buried proper. Ghost sat down beside him. President's authorizing a full club funeral, 300 brothers minimum, colors mandatory. We're going to shut down Oakland for a day and give Tommy the send-off he deserves. Jackson felt his throat tighten. A full club funeral meant procession, meant speeches, meant thousands of people lining the streets. It meant honoring a fallen brother the way only the club could. It meant admitting Tommy was really gone. I should give the eulogy. Already assumed you would. You knew him best. I didn't know him well enough. Didn't know he had a daughter. Didn't know he'd been watching Morrison for months. Didn't know half the things he was carrying. That's how Tommy was. Kept things close to the vest. Didn't want to burden people with his problems. Ghost pulled out a cigarette, lit it, offered one to Jackson. But he called you. When it mattered, when he needed someone, he called you. That tells me everything about how much he trusted you. Jackson took the cigarette, let the smoke burn his lungs. I should have gotten here faster. Should have sensed something was wrong before he died. And I should have insisted on riding with him when he first told us about Redemption. Should have sent backup whether he wanted it or not. Ghost blew smoke into the cooling air. Lot of shoulds in this world, brother. But shoulda doesn't bring anyone back. All we can do is make sure his death meant something. Make sure Morrison and his people pay for every life they took. 8 confirmed victims, maybe 20 total. That's not just a corrupt cop ghost. That's a monster. Yeah, and we killed the monster. Now we've got to clean up what he left behind. Jackson's phone buzzed. Brennan's number. He answered without greeting. We have a problem. Morrison's lawyers just filed a motion to suppress the camera footage, claiming it was obtained illegally, that Tommy didn't have permission to install surveillance equipment in a private business. Jackson stood up, adrenaline spiking. That footage is the only reason we found him out. Without it, we still have witness testimony, forensic evidence, financial records, and deputy cooperation. The case isn't dead, but it's weaker, much weaker. Morrison's lawyers are good. Ex-federal prosecutors, high-powered defense team. They're going to pick apart every piece of evidence we have. When's the hearing? 2 days. Judge want us to move fast on this. If we lose this motion, Brennan didn't need to finish. If they lost the footage, Morrison's lawyers would tear the case apart piece by piece. Reasonable doubt, circumstantial evidence, coerced testimony. All the tools crooked lawyers use to free guilty men. Ghost was on his feet now, too, reading Jackson's expression. How bad? Bad. Morrison might walk. The words hung in the air like poison. After everything they'd uncovered, everything Tommy had died for, the possibility that Morrison could beat this case seemed impossible. But Jackson had seen it before. Seen guilty men walk free because some technicality, some procedural error, some smart lawyer had found a crack in the prosecution's armor. Over my dead body, Ghost said quietly. We don't let that happen, whatever it takes. Ghost, we can't. I'm not talking about doing anything illegal. I'm talking about making sure every piece of evidence is clean, every witness is prepared, every angle is covered. I'm talking about putting pressure on Morrison's lawyers to make them slip up. I'm talking about making this case so airtight that no amount of legal maneuvering can crack it. Jackson thought about that. Brennan's good, she's thorough. If anyone can beat Morrison's lawyers, it's her. Then we make sure she has everything she needs. Every resource, every witness, every scrap of evidence. We don't give Morrison an inch. Brennan's voice came through the phone again. There's something else. One of the bodies we recovered has a distinctive tattoo, small phoenix on the left ankle. I'm sending you a photo. We need to identify her. Jackson's phone buzzed with the incoming image. He looked at it, felt his stomach drop. He'd seen that tattoo before. 6 months ago, on a woman who'd served him coffee in this exact town. A woman who'd smiled at him despite the bruise on her cheek, who'd made small talk about the weather, who'd seemed so tired but still kind. Her name was Maria Gonzalez, Jackson said slowly. I met her. Last time I rode through Redemption, she was working at the diner. Early 30s, dark hair, that phoenix tattoo. She just moved here from Tucson. When was this? November, late November. I was heading to Phoenix for a club meeting, stopped for coffee. She seemed scared, kept looking over her shoulder. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was fine, just adjusting to small-town life. Did she mention Morrison? No, but I saw him come into the diner while I was there. Saw how she reacted when he walked in, like she was trying to disappear into the floor. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Maria Gonzalez was reported missing December 3rd. You might have been one of the last people to see her alive. I'll need you to give a formal statement. Jackson closed his eyes, remembering Maria's smile, remembering the fear in her eyes, remembering how he'd walked away without asking more questions because it wasn't his business, wasn't his town, wasn't his problem. Except it had been his problem. It had been everyone's problem. And because people like him had looked the other way, Maria was dead. I'll give you whatever you need, he said. After Brennan hung up, Jackson sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Ghost settled beside him again, and they watched the desert night settle in, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. You couldn't have known, Ghost said quietly. I should have. You're not psychic, Jackie. None of us are. We do the best we can with what we know at the time. My best wasn't good enough. Tommy's best wasn't good enough. We're brothers. We're supposed to protect people, and we failed. We didn't fail. Morrison failed. The system failed. The people who knew what he was and did nothing failed. But not us. We showed up. We fought back. We're still fighting. Ghost crushed his cigarette under his boot. That's all we can do. Show up and fight. Rest is in God's hands. Jackson wasn't sure he believed in God anymore. Hadn't believed in much of anything since watching too many good men die young, while bastards like Morrison lived to old age. But he believed in the club, believed in brotherhood, believed that some things were worth fighting for even when you knew you might lose. A motorcycle roared into the parking lot, then another. 5 new brothers arriving from San Diego wearing full colors, carrying the weight of the road on their faces. They'd ridden straight through 12 hours without stopping because that's what brothers did when one of their own was murdered. Ghost stood to greet them. Jackson followed. Introductions were made, condolences offered, information shared. The San Diego brothers had brought supplies, food, water, medical kits, ammunition, preparing for a siege that might never come, but being ready just in case. How long we staying, one of them asked. Until it's done, Ghost said. Until Morrison and his people are convicted and sentenced. until justice is served. Could be months. Then we're here for months. We rotate out in shifts, but there's always at least 20 brothers in redemption at all times. Nobody threatens our people. Nobody attacks our witnesses. We make it clear that touching anything connected to this case means going through us first. The San Diego brothers nodded. They understood. This was what the club did. They stood guard. They protected the vulnerable. They made damn sure the monsters of the world knew there were consequences for their actions. Jackson's phone rang again. Cassidy's number this time. "Jackson, I need you to come to the shelter. Now, something's wrong." His blood went cold. What happened? "Someone's outside, been sitting in a car across the street for the last hour, just sitting there watching." Linda called the police, but they said without an actual threat, there's nothing they can do. "I'm on my way." He was on his bike before Cassidy finished talking Ghost and 3 other brothers right behind him. They made it to Phoenix in 90 minutes, racing through the night at speeds that would have gotten them arrested on any other day. The shelter looked peaceful when they arrived, just another house on a quiet street. But Jackson saw the car Cassidy had mentioned, a dark sedan with tinted windows parked directly across from the shelter with a clear view of the entrance. Ghost pulled up beside the sedan, knocking on the driver's window with his ring. The window rolled down slowly. The driver was mid-40s, wearing a cheap suit with the kind of hard eyes that came from years of doing dirty work for dirty people. "Help you gentlemen?" the driver asked, voice dripping false politeness. "You've been sitting here for over an hour. Got business in this neighborhood. Free country. I can sit wherever I want." "Sure you can, long as you're not harassing the women in that shelter. Because if you are, we're going to have a problem." The driver smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a guy sitting in his car, making some phone calls, enjoying the evening." Ghost leaned closer. "Let me make something crystal clear. That shelter is under our protection. Anyone who threatens it threatens the women inside it, threatens anyone connected to the Morrison case. They're threatening us. And we don't take threats lightly. Understand? Sounds like you're threatening me." "Just stating facts. You can sit here all night if you want, but know that we're watching. We've got your license plate. We've got your face. We've got every move you make recorded on 6 different phones right now. So when you report back to whoever sent you, you tell them this: stay away from Cassidy Warren. Stay away from this shelter. Stay away from our people. Or find out what happens when you piss off 100 bikers with nothing to lose." The driver's smile faded. He started his engine without another word, pulled away from the curb, and disappeared into the night. Jackson watched him go, then walked to the shelter door. Linda let him in immediately, her face tight with worry. "Thank God you're here. That car's been there since 6 o'clock. He's gone now, but he might come back. We're posting guards outside permanently. 3 brothers, minimum, armed 24/7. Nobody gets near this place without us knowing." Linda nodded, relief flooding her features. "Cassidy's in her room, second door on the left upstairs. She's been scared out of her mind." Jackson climbed the stairs, knocked softly. Cassidy's voice came through, muffled and frightened. "Who is it?" "It's Jackson." The door opened. Cassidy stood there in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, looking younger than her years, looking like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been through hell and was still fighting to survive. "He's gone," Jackson said before she could ask. "The man in the car, he's gone and he's not coming back." "How do you know?" "Because we're setting up permanent security outside the shelter. Nobody gets near you. Nobody threatens you. I swear it." Cassidy's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. You just met me yesterday." "I'm doing this because Tommy couldn't, because he died trying to protect you, and I'll be damned if I let his death be for nothing. Because nobody deserves what Morrison did to you. Because it's the right thing to do." Jackson paused. "And because you're family now. Tommy made you family. That means the club protects you. Simple as that." Cassidy stepped forward and hugged him, sudden and fierce, her face pressed against his chest. Jackson stood there, awkward, not sure what to do, finally settling for patting her back gently. She was shaking, he realized, still terrified despite everything they'd done. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I promise you're safe." When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy with tears, but something like hope flickered in her eyes. "The FBI wants me to look at photos tomorrow. the women they found, to help identify them. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Those women didn't have anyone protecting them, didn't have brothers or guards or people who cared enough to fight for them. The least I can do is give them their names back. Let their families know what happened. Give them closure, even if it's the worst kind. Jackson looked at this woman, this survivor, and felt something like pride. She'd been beaten, terrorized, trapped by a monster, and she was still standing, still fighting, still trying to help others, even when she could barely help herself. "You're braver than you know," he said. "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being scared." Sometimes that's the same thing. Jackson left the shelter just before midnight, three brothers already positioning themselves outside with clear sightlines to every entrance. Ghost had coordinated a rotation schedule, 8-hour shifts, fresh eyes every cycle, nobody getting complacent. The kind of security you put in place when lives depended on it. The ride back to redemption felt longer than it was. Jackson's mind kept circling back to Cassidy's face, to the way she'd forced herself to stop shaking, to the steel in her voice when she'd said she was going to identify those bodies. Tommy had died for her. The least Jackson could do was make sure that sacrifice meant something. His phone rang halfway back. Unknown number. Jackson almost didn't answer, but something made him hit accept. "Mr. Reeves." The voice was male-cultured, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "My name is Richard Blackwell. I represent Frank Morrison in his current legal difficulties." Jackson's hands tightened on the handlebars. "You got balls calling me lawyer." "I'm calling because I believe we may have mutual interests. My client is willing to provide information about certain criminal enterprises in the region, information that could be quite valuable to both federal authorities and, shall we say, interested private parties, in exchange for consideration regarding his current charges. Your client's a serial killer. There's no deal that makes that okay. My client maintains his innocence. But hypothetically speaking, if someone had information about drug trafficking routes, money laundering operations, corrupt officials in 3 counties, information that could dismantle criminal networks, your organization has been fighting for years. Wouldn't that be worth exploring?" Jackson pulled off the highway, needing to focus on this conversation without wrapping his bike around a guardrail. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A meeting. You, me, my client. Strictly off the record. No recording devices. No federal presence. Just a conversation between reasonable men about how we might all get what we want. I want Morrison in a cell for the rest of his life. You offering that..." Blackwell's laugh was dry. "I'm offering you the opportunity to take down larger fish." Morrison was a small-town sheriff. The people he worked for, the networks he was connected to, they're the real threat. Help us and you help yourselves. By letting a child killer walk. By making strategic choices. By understanding that sometimes you have to sacrifice the pawn to take the king. Jackson felt rage building in his chest, hot and choking. "You want to know what I understand? I understand your client murdered at least 8 women, maybe more. I understand he killed my brother. I understand he terrorized a whole town for over a decade. And I understand that if you think I'm going to help him escape justice, you're out of your goddamn mind. Mr. Reeves, I'd urge you to think carefully." Jackson hung up. His hands were shaking. He called Brennan, immediately told her everything about the conversation. She listened in silence, then swore creatively. "Blackwell's one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the Southwest. Former U.S. attorney, connections all the way to Washington. If Morrison hired him, someone's bankrolling this defense. Someone with deep pockets. Who? That's what we need to find out. Morrison's financial records show he had maybe $200,000 in savings. Blackwell charges that for a retainer alone. Someone's paying his fees. Someone who wants Morrison to either walk or cut a deal that keeps him quiet." Jackson processed that. Morrison knows things that implicate people more powerful than him. That's my read. And those people are scared enough to hire the best lawyer money can buy. Scared enough to send someone to stake out the shelter where our star witness is staying. We need protection on everyone connected to this case, not just Cassidy, Eugene at the diner, the deputies who are cooperating, anyone who can testify. Already working on it. U.S. Marshals are handling witness security now. But Jackson, you need to be careful. Blackwell calling you directly means they're trying to find leverage, trying to see if they can turn you You do something stupid that compromises the case. I'm not doing anything stupid. Good. Keep it that way. Morrison's suppression hearing is tomorrow at 10. I need you there to testify about Tommy installing those cameras. Your testimony could make or break whether that footage stays admissible. Jackson got back on his bike, rode the rest of the way to Redemption with his mind racing. The motel parking lot was full now, bikes lined up like soldiers at attention. He found Ghost in the small room they'd converted into a command center, surrounded by maps and printouts and laptops showing various surveillance feeds. "We got a problem," Jackson said, and told him about Blackwell's call. Ghost's face went dark. "They're trying to flip you, make you think there's a bigger target worth letting Morrison walk for." "That's what I figure. Question is, are they right? Is there someone bigger pulling strings here?" "Brennan thinks so. Morrison couldn't afford Blackwell on his own. Someone's paying the bills. Someone who doesn't want Morrison talking." "Then we find out who." Ghost pulled up a laptop, started typing. "I got a guy, ex-hacker, owes me a favor. He can track financial transactions, shell companies, the kind of money trails that lead to the real players. That legal, gray area. But if it gives us names, gives us leverage, I don't much care about legalities right now." Jackson should have objected, should have said they had to do this by the book. But he thought about Tommy dead in the desert, about Cassidy's bruised face, about 8 bodies and counting, and he found he didn't care much about legalities either. The suppression hearing started at 10 sharp in the federal courthouse in Phoenix. The courtroom was packed. Media, Morrison's supporters, victims, families, law enforcement from 6 different agencies. Jackson sat behind the prosecution table wearing his colors, despite knowing it would antagonize Morrison's people. He wanted them to know exactly who was watching. Morrison entered in orange prison scrubs, hands cuffed, looking smaller somehow, without his uniform and badge. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, showing no remorse. He saw Jackson and smiled, actually smiled. Blackwell stood to present his motion. He was everything Jackson had expected, a silver-haired, expensive suit voice, like warm honey. He argued that Tommy had no legal right to install surveillance cameras in Eugene's diner without the owner's knowledge or consent. He argued that the footage obtained was therefore illegally gathered and constituted a violation of Morrison's Fourth Amendment rights. He argued that admitting such evidence would set a dangerous precedent for vigilante justice. "Your Honor, we're not talking about legitimate law enforcement conducting a proper investigation. We're talking about a motorcycle gang member conducting illegal surveillance without warrant, without cause, without any legal authority whatsoever. To allow such evidence would be to endorse lawlessness." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, countered that the diner was a public space, that customers had no reasonable expectation of privacy, that the cameras had captured Morrison committing assault in plain view of multiple witnesses. "Your Honor, the defendant was a sworn law enforcement officer who used his position of authority to terrorize the victim. The surveillance in question documented an ongoing criminal activity. The fact that it was installed by a private citizen doesn't negate the reality of what it captured." The judge, a stern man in his 60s named Harmon, looked unconvinced. "Ms. Chen, I'm sympathetic to your argument, but Mr. Blackwell raises valid concerns about chain of custody, about the legality of the surveillance itself. Can you establish that the person who installed these cameras had any legal right to do so?" "We can establish that Eugene Watts, the owner of the diner, gave verbal permission after the fact, that he ratified the surveillance once he became aware of it. After the fact ratification doesn't cure an initial illegal installation," Blackwell interjected smoothly. "The cameras were placed without knowledge or consent. Any footage obtained is fruit of the poisonous tree." Harmon nodded slowly. "I'm inclined to agree, unless you can produce evidence that Mr. Calabrese had explicit permission before installing those cameras." "Your Honor, I can provide that evidence." Every head in the courtroom turned. Eugene Watts stood in the gallery, his weathered hands gripping the bench in front of him. The judge frowned. "Mr. Watts, you're not recognized to speak. With respect." "Your Honor, I need to speak. I need to tell the truth." Eugene's voice shook but held firm. "Tommy Calabrese asked me if he could install those cameras. Asked me 6 months ago, told me what he suspected about Morrison, told me he wanted to gather evidence. And I said yes. I said yes because my granddaughter worked at that diner, because I'd seen Morrison hit my waitresses, because I was too much of a coward to stand up to him myself, but I could at least let Tommy try." The courtroom erupted. Blackwell was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This testimony is unsworn, unvetted. Then swear me in, Eugene said. Put me on the stand. I'll say it under oath. I'll say it as many times as you need to hear it. Tommy had my permission. Those cameras were legal, and everything they captured is real. Harmon banged his gavel. Order, Mr. Blackwell, do you wish to cross-examine this witness? Blackwell's face had gone carefully blank. I'd like to request a recess to prepare. Denied. Mr. Watts approached the witness stand. Eugene walked forward on unsteady legs. The bailiff swore him in. Chen asked him to repeat his statement, this time under oath. Eugene did his voice stronger now, looking directly at Morrison as he spoke. Tommy came to me in November. Said he'd been watching Morrison for weeks. Said he thought the sheriff was hurting women, maybe worse. Asked if he could put cameras in the diner to prove it. I said yes. Signed a paper giving him permission even. Tommy had everything legal and proper. Do you have this signed document? Harmon asked. Gave it to the FBI 3 days ago. Agent Brennan has it in evidence. Chen produced a paper from her files, handed it to the judge. Harmon examined it, his expression shifting from skepticism to certainty. This appears to be a notarized consent form giving Thomas Calabrese explicit permission to install surveillance equipment at the Desert Rose Diner. Dated November 18th, 2025. Mr. Blackwell, would you like to examine this? Blackwell took the document, studied it, his face betraying nothing. But Jackson saw his jaw tighten. Saw the moment he realized his entire motion had just collapsed. Your Honor, we'd need time to verify the authenticity of this document. It's authentic, Eugene said flatly. I signed it. Tommy had it notarized at the bank. Everything was done proper because Tommy was a good man who believed in doing things right. Harmon looked at Blackwell. Unless you can provide evidence that this document is fraudulent, I'm denying your motion to suppress. The surveillance footage is admissible. Morrison's mask slipped for just a second. Jackson saw rage flash across his face, saw his hands clench into fists. Then the mask was back, but it was too late. Everyone had seen it. The hearing ended. Eugene was swarmed by reporters as he left the stand. Jackson intercepted him, pulling him aside before the media circus could completely engulf him. Why didn't you tell anyone about that permission form before now? Eugene's eyes were red-rimmed. I was scared. Thought if Morrison's people knew I'd help Tommy, they'd come after me. But then I saw that lawyer trying to get him off on a technicality, saw Morrison sitting there smiling. Like he'd already beaten this, and He trailed off. I couldn't let Tommy's death be for nothing. Couldn't let that monster walk free because I was too scared to speak up. You just saved this case. You know that? I just told the truth. About time someone in this town did. Jackson left Eugene with the federal agents who would now have to provide him protection and found Brennan in the hallway looking both triumphant and exhausted. That was unexpected, she said. Good unexpected or bad. Good for the case, bad for our witness protection program. Eugene just painted a target on his back. She pulled out her phone, already coordinating. I'm putting him in protective custody immediately. Morrison's people will go after him now. Put him with the marshals. We'll provide additional security. Brennan nodded. Speaking of security, we got the DNA results back on 2 more bodies. One is confirmed as Jenny Martinez. The other, she paused. Rebecca Williams, Helen's daughter. Jackson felt his stomach drop. God, someone needs to tell Helen. Already done. She's with family liaison now. But Jackson, there's something else. The coroner found something on Jenny's body, a piece of fabric clutched in her hand. Looks like she tore it off her attacker during the struggle. We're running DNA on it now. You think it'll match Morrison? I think it'll match someone. And when it does, we'll have physical evidence linking a specific person to a specific murder. That's the nail in the coffin. Jackson's phone buzzed. Ghost's number. He answered immediately. Jackie, we got a situation. Someone just tried to burn down the diner, Eugene's place, right after the hearing ended. Is Eugene? He's with you, but the diner's gone. Fire department's there now, but it's too late. Place is a total loss. Jackson closed his eyes. Anyone hurt? No, but it's a message. They're telling us they can strike whenever they want, wherever they want. Then we send a message back. Find out who did this. We make an example. Already on it. Got brothers watching every known associate of Morrison's. Someone's going to slip up, and when they do, we'll be there. Jackson hung up and turned to Brennan. Eugene's diner just burned. This is escalating. I know. I'm hearing it on the radio now. Arson investigators are already en route. She looked at him seriously. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Morrison's people are desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also do dangerous things. You need to be careful. I'm always careful. No, you're not. You're loyal and you're brave and you're determined, but you're not careful. Don't let your need for justice turn into a need for revenge. That's what Morrison wants. He wants you to do something stupid that gives Blackwell ammunition to discredit you. Discredit this case. Jackson knew she was right. Knew he was walking a razor's edge between justice and vengeance. I'll be careful. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of anger and activity. The fire at the diner was ruled arson accelerant, poured through the broken window lit from outside. No witnesses, no suspects, but everyone knew who was responsible. Eugene took it harder than Jackson expected. That diner had been his life, his legacy, his connection to his dead wife. Now it was ashes. The DNA results came back on the fabric from Jenny Martinez's hand. It matched Deputy Rollins, not Morrison himself, but one of his men. Brennan called it the break. They needed evidence that could flip Rollins completely, make him testify against Morrison to save himself. And it worked. 36 hours after the DNA match, Rollins cut a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for 20 years instead of life. He gave the FBI everything: dates, locations, details of 6 murders he'd witnessed Morrison commit. He described how Morrison would target women, how he'd isolate them, how he'd make them disappear. He described the burial sites, the cover-ups, the bribes paid to keep people quiet. His testimony would be devastating. Morrison had to know it. Had to know the walls were closing in. Jackson was at the motel when Ghost's hacker friend came through with financial information. The money paying for Morrison's defense wasn't coming from Morrison at all. It was coming from a shell company registered in Delaware, which was owned by another shell company in the Caymans, which eventually traced back to a real estate development corporation based in Tucson. The corporation was owned by a man named Marcus Rothwell, billionaire, property developer, connected to politicians from city council to state senate. And according to the financial records Ghost's hacker had pulled, Rothwell had been paying Morrison under the table for the better part of a decade. Protection money? Jackson asked, staring at the documents spread across the motel room bed. More than that. Ghost pointed to specific transactions. Morrison was providing security for Rothwell's projects, making sure unions didn't cause trouble, making sure protesters disappeared, making sure anyone who opposed Rothwell's developments either got scared off or he trailed off meaningfully or ended up in the desert. That's my guess. Rothwell needed muscle, needed someone who could hurt people without it coming back on him. Morrison provided that service. In exchange, Rothwell made sure Morrison got elected, stayed elected, and got rich doing it. Jackson felt the pieces clicking into place. So when Morrison got arrested, Rothwell hired the best lawyer money could buy. Not to save Morrison, but to make sure Morrison doesn't talk about Rothwell. Exactly. If Morrison goes down, he takes Rothwell with him, unless Rothwell can either get him off or get him killed before he testifies. The implications settled over Jackson like a weight. We need to tell Brennan. Already did. She's getting warrants now. But Jackie, this is bigger than we thought. Rothwell's connected. Really connected. We're talking about taking down a man with enough money and power to make people disappear. People like Tommy. Yeah, people like Tommy. Jackson's phone rang, Cassidy's number, but when he answered, it was Linda's voice, tight with fear. Jackson, you need to get here now. Someone tried to break into the shelter. We're on lockdown. He was moving before she finished talking. Ghost right behind him. They made it to Phoenix in record time, arriving to find police cars surrounding the shelter, brothers standing guard with weapons clearly visible. Women huddled inside, looking terrified. Linda met them at the door. 3 men masked tried to force their way in through the back. Our security system caught them. The brothers you posted outside stopped them before they got through. But Jackson, they had guns. They weren't here to scare us. They were here to kill someone. Where's Cassidy? Safe room in the basement with 6 other women. She's okay. shaken but okay. Jackson found her in the concrete-walled room, sitting on a cot, arms wrapped around herself. She looked up when he entered and relief flooded her face. They came for me. They actually came for me. I know, but they didn't get you, and they're never going to get you. How can you promise that? How can you possibly promise that when they're willing to attack a shelter full of women just to get to me? Jackson sat beside her. Because this ends now. Morrison's wall of protection is crumbling. His deputies are flipping. His financier is about to be exposed. He's got nothing left except fear, and fear only works if people let it work. I'm terrified, Cassidy whispered. Every time I close my eyes, I see Morrison's face. I hear his voice. I feel his hands on me. How am I supposed to testify against him when I can barely say his name without shaking? The same way Eugene stood up in that courtroom. The same way Tommy installed those cameras knowing Morrison might kill them for it. The same way all those women who didn't survive would want you to. You stand up. You tell the truth. You refuse to let fear win. What if I can't? Then you can't. And we find another way. But Cassidy, I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're stronger than you know. Stronger than Morrison ever expected. That's why he's scared. That's why he's sending people after you, because he knows you're going to destroy him. Cassidy was quiet for a long time. Then she straightened, wiping her eyes. The FBI wants me to testify at the grand jury next week. They need me to describe what Morrison did, how long it went on, how he threatened me. Can you do it? I have to. For Tommy, for Jenny and Maria and Rebecca and all the others who can't speak for themselves anymore. She looked at Jackson. But I need you there. Not in the room I know you can't be, but in the building. Knowing you're there. Knowing I'm not alone. I'll be there, I promise. The next morning, Jackson got a call from Tommy's sister in Oakland. The funeral was in 2 days. Full club honors. 300 brothers confirmed attending. She wanted to know if Jackson would speak. He said yes without hesitation. Even though the thought of standing up in front of hundreds of people and talking about Tommy made his throat close up, even though he wasn't sure he could get through it without falling apart. Ghost found him that afternoon sitting outside the motel staring at nothing. You okay? No, but I will be. Funeral's going to be rough, seeing his family, seeing his daughter, knowing he died because we weren't there to back him up. He didn't want backup. You know how Tommy was, stubborn, independent, thought he could handle anything by himself. Yeah, and it got him killed. Ghost sat down beside him. We can't make that mistake. Whatever's coming next, we face it together. All of us. Agreed. Ghost's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his expression darkening. Just got word from Brennan. Federal agents raided Rothwell's offices an hour ago. Seized computers, financial records, found evidence linking him to Morrison. They're arresting him as we speak. Jackson felt something like vindication. Good. Let him see what it's like to lose everything. There's more. Rothwell's lawyer is already talking deals. Says Rothwell will testify against Morrison in exchange for reduced charges. Says Morrison was the mastermind. Says Rothwell was coerced, manipulated, forced to pay protection money. That's bullshit. Of course it's bullshit. But if a billionaire with a team of lawyers says it under oath, some people might believe it. Might be enough to create reasonable doubt about Morrison's guilt. Jackson stood up, rage burning through his exhaustion. No, we don't let that happen. We don't let some rich bastard buy his way out while Morrison takes the fall for crimes they committed together. How do we stop it? We make sure Brennan has everything. Every piece of evidence linking Rothwell to those murders. Every financial transaction. Every witness who can testify about their relationship. We make the case so airtight that no amount of money can crack it. That's going to take time we might not have. Grand jury's next week. If Rothwell testifies before we have countering evidence, then we work faster. We work harder. We don't sleep until we have what we need. Ghost nodded slowly. All right, I'll call in every favor we have. Every brother with legal knowledge. Every connection to law enforcement. Every hacker who owes us. We build this case from the ground up. They worked through the night. Brothers from 6 different chapters contributed. Paralegals, former cops, private investigators, computer experts. They built a timeline of Rothwell's payments to Morrison. They tracked properties Rothwell had developed that required Morrison's intervention. They found witness statements from people who'd been threatened and intimidated or assaulted by Morrison on Rothwell's behalf. By dawn, they had a file 3 inches thick. Jackson delivered it to Brennan personally. She flipped through it, her expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. How did you get this? Does it matter? Some of this is going to be inadmissible. Obtained without warrants, chain of custody issues. But some of it will stick. And the parts that stick will be enough to show Rothwell wasn't a victim. He was a partner, a co-conspirator. Brennan studied him for a long moment. You're playing a dangerous game, Jackson. Rothwell has resources you can't imagine. He could come after you after your club make your lives very difficult. Let him try. We're used to difficult. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll use what I can. And Jackson, thank you. This could make the difference between Morrison walking and Morrison dying in prison. Jackson left the federal building feeling something he hadn't felt in days: hope. Real hope that this nightmare might actually end the right way. He rode to Oakland that afternoon. Ghost and 20 other brothers beside him. The funeral was tomorrow. Tommy would be buried with full honors, his sacrifice finally recognized. Tommy's family home was in East Oakland, a modest house on a quiet street. His sister Margaret met them at the door, her eyes red from crying, but her voice steady. Thank you for coming. Tommy talked about you all the time, said you were the best friend he had ever had. Jackson couldn't speak for a moment, finally managed, he was my brother, in every way that mattered. Come in, meet his daughter, she's been asking about you. Tommy's daughter was 19, home from college for the funeral. She looked like her father, same eyes, same stubborn jaw. She shook Jackson's hand and held it tight. Dad said you'd come, said if anything ever happened to him, you'd make sure justice was done. I'm trying, we all are. Good, because he died believing in something, believing that one person could make a difference, that standing up to evil mattered even when it cost everything. She paused. Don't let him be wrong about that. Don't let his death be meaningless. I won't, I swear it. The funeral the next day was everything it should have been. Hundreds of brothers in full colors lining the streets, their bikes gleaming in the sun. A procession that shut down traffic for miles. Speeches that honored Tommy's courage, his loyalty, his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Jackson gave the eulogy. He talked about brotherhood, about sacrifice, about a man who'd seen injustice and couldn't look away. He talked about Tommy's last act, installing those cameras, gathering evidence, setting in motion the chain of events that would bring down a killer. Tommy knew he might not survive what he was doing, Jackson said, his voice carrying across the crowded cemetery. But he did it anyway, because that's what brothers do. We stand up. We fight back. We protect the innocent, even when it costs us everything. Tommy died a hero, not because he wore a uniform or carried a badge, but because he had the courage to do what was right when everyone else was too scared to act. That's the legacy he left us. That's what we honor today. As they lowered Tommy's casket into the ground, as 300 bikers revved their engines in tribute, Jackson made a silent promise. Morrison would pay. Rothwell would pay. Everyone who'd had a hand in Tommy's death would face justice. He would make sure of it, no matter what it took, no matter how long it took, because that's what brothers did. They kept their promises, they protected their own, and they never ever forgot. Claude responded. The call came 3 days after Tommy's funeral, just as Jackson was preparing to ride back to redemption. The call came 3 days after Tommy's funeral, just as Jackson was preparing to ride back to redemption. Brennan's voice was tight, urgent. We have a problem. Rothwell made bail, posted $50 million, and walked out 2 hours ago. Jackson felt ice slide down his spine. How is that even possible? High-powered lawyers, character, witnesses, promises he wouldn't flee. The judge bought it. Brennan paused. Jackson Rothwell's people have been making calls, offering money to witnesses to recant, offering jobs, protection, whatever it takes to get them to change their stories. Has anyone taken the offers? Not yet, but some are wavering. These are scared people, Jackson. Poor people. The kind who've never seen that much money in their lives. Rothwell's offering them security, a way out. It's tempting. What about Eugene? He's solid, won't budge. But 2 of Morrison's other deputies who were cooperating, they're getting cold feet. Their lawyers are talking deals with Rothwell's team. If they flip, we lose crucial testimony linking Morrison and Rothwell together. Jackson closed his eyes, feeling the case start to slip away. What do you need from us? Keep the witnesses strong, remind them why they're doing this. Because if we lose them, Morrison and Rothwell both walk, and everything Tommy died for means nothing. Jackson gathered the brothers, immediately explained the situation. Ghost's face went dark as carved stone. We need to talk to those deputies. Face to face, make them understand what's at stake. Brennan won't like us interfering with the witnesses. Then we don't tell her. We just have a friendly conversation with men who are thinking about betraying their badge a second time. They found Deputy Crawford at his brother's house in Mesa, hiding from reporters and trying to figure out his next move. When he opened the door and saw 20 bikers standing on the porch, the color drained from his face. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm cooperating with the FBI. That's what we heard, Jackson said quietly. Also heard you're thinking about changing your mind. Taking money from the man who paid your boss to murder innocent women. Crawford's jaw tightened. I got a family, kids who need to eat. Rothwell's offering $2 million in witness protection. You know what that kind of money means to someone like me. I know what betraying 8 dead women means. I know what it means to Tommy's daughter, who buried her father last week. I know what it means to Cassidy, who's got to live with the trauma of what Morrison did to her for the rest of her life. That's not my fault. No, but you stood by and let it happen. You saw what Morrison was doing and you said nothing, did nothing, took your paycheck, and went home to your family every night while women died. Jackson stepped closer. Now you've got a chance to make it right, to stand up and tell the truth, to help put away the men who turned you into a dirty cop. And you're thinking about taking blood money instead. Crawford's wash eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. Rothwell's people said, if I don't take the deal, if I testify against him, my family will pay. They said accidents happen, that house is burned down, that kids walking to school sometimes don't make it home. The threat hung in the air, ugly and real. Ghost spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of decades of brotherhood. Then you put your family under our protection. We move them somewhere safe. We make sure Rothwell's people never get near them. And when this is over, when Morrison and Rothwell are both in prison, you get your life back. A life you can be proud of. A life where you looked your kids in the eye and told them you did the right thing. How can you promise to keep them safe? Because we're Hell's Angels. We've been protecting people from men like Rothwell for 50 years. We don't break. We don't bend. We don't let anyone hurt our people. Your family becomes our family. That's how this works. Crawford was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll do it. But if anything happens to my kids, nothing will happen, Jackson said firmly. You have my word. They moved Crawford's family that night. Wife and 2 kids relocated to a safe house in Northern California, guarded by brothers from the San Francisco chapter. Crawford gave a full statement to the FBI the next morning, on record videotape detailing everything he knew about Morrison and Rothwell's relationship. The second deputy, a younger man named Torres, was harder to convince. He'd already taken $50,000 from Rothwell's lawyers as a down payment. But when Ghost showed him photos of the 8 victims, when he made Torres look at their faces and read their names aloud, something broke in the young man. I didn't know, Torres whispered. I swear I didn't know Morrison was killing them. I thought he was just rough. Thought he was just old school policing. I didn't know. Now you know, Jackson said. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Torres returned the money the next day, gave a statement to Brennan, threw himself on the mercy of the court, and begged for the chance to make things right. The grand jury convened on a Wednesday morning. Cassidy testified for 4 hours, describing in excruciating detail what Morrison had done to her over 2 years. She broke down twice, but kept going, kept talking, kept telling the truth, even when her voice shook and tears streamed down her face. Jackson waited in the hallway outside, pacing like a caged animal. When she finally emerged pale and exhausted, she walked straight to him and collapsed into his arms. I did it. I actually did it. You were amazing. I was terrified, but I kept thinking about what you said, about Tommy, about the women who can't speak anymore. And I kept talking. The grand jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they emerged, they handed up indictments against both Morrison and Rothwell. 14 counts of first-degree murder for Morrison, conspiracy to commit murder and racketeering for Rothwell, plus dozens of lesser charges: assault, corruption, evidence, tampering, witness, intimidation. Brennan called Jackson with the news. We got them. Both of them. Trial starts in 3 months. 3 months is a long time. A lot can happen. I know. That's why I need you and your brothers to stay vigilant. Rothwell's back in custody, no bail this time. But his organization is still out there, still dangerous. She wasn't wrong. 2 days later, someone took a shot at Eugene as he walked to his car outside the federal building. The bullet missed by inches, punching through the driver's side window. Federal agents swarmed the area, found the shooter's position on a rooftop 3 blocks away, but the shooter was gone. Eugene moved into protective custody that night, a safe house guarded by U.S. Marshals and 6 Hells Angels working in rotating shifts. He was shaken but unbroken. They think they can scare me into silence, he told Jackson. But I'm done being scared, done letting evil men win because good people are too afraid to fight back. The weeks leading up to the trial were tense, violent, unpredictable. Rothwell's people tried everything: bribes, threats, intimidation. Someone firebombed Ghost's bike outside the Redemption Motel. Someone slashed the tires on every vehicle at the shelter where Cassidy was staying. Someone sent death threats to 3 different witnesses. But nobody broke. Nobody ran. Nobody let fear win. The trial began on a hot Monday in August. The courthouse was ringed with security federal agents, National Guard police from 6 jurisdictions. Inside the gallery was packed with media victims' families, bikers wearing their colors, and citizens of redemption who'd lived under Morrison's thumb for too long. Morrison sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than most people in that courtroom, made in a year, his face carefully neutral, his hands folded. Next to him, Blackwell radiated expensive competence. At the prosecution table, Brennan and her team looked sharp, focused, ready for war. The prosecution's case was methodical, devastating, overwhelming. They presented the surveillance footage of Morrison hitting Cassidy. They brought in forensic experts who matched DNA from the burial sites to Morrison's truck, his clothes, his tools. They paraded witness after witness who described Morrison's reign of terror. Crawford testified for 2 days, his voice steady as he described how Morrison would target vulnerable women, how he'd isolate them, how he'd make them disappear when they fought back. Torres corroborated everything, adding details about how Morrison and Rollins would drive bodies out to the desert in the middle of the night. Rollins himself testified, having cut his deal, describing 6 murders in graphic detail, describing how Morrison would joke about it afterward, would talk about the women like they were animals he'd put down, like they were problems he'd solved. The families of the victims sat through it all, faces carved from stone, hearing the worst details of how their daughters and sisters and mothers had died. Helen Williams never took her eyes off Morrison, staring at him with such concentrated hatred that Jackson thought she might combust from the force of it. Then Cassidy took the stand. The courtroom went silent as she was sworn in. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup to cover the fading bruises that still marked her face. She looked small in the witness box, fragile, breakable. But when she started talking, her voice was strong. She described meeting Morrison shortly after she'd moved to Redemption, how he'd seemed charming at first, protective, how that had changed gradually into control, then intimidation, then violence. She described the first time he'd hit her, how he'd apologized afterward, promised it would never happen again, how it had happened again and again and again. She described living in constant fear, afraid to leave, afraid to stay trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. She described Tommy coming to the diner, asking questions, offering help. She described telling him to leave it alone, to not get involved, because she was terrified of what Morrison would do. But Tommy wouldn't leave it alone, Cassidy said, her voice breaking. He said nobody should have to live in fear. He said he was going to stop Morrison, make him answer for what he'd done. I told him to be careful. I told him Morrison was dangerous. What did Tommy say to that? Brennan asked gently. Cassidy's tears were flowing freely now. He said some things were worth dying for. He said protecting innocent people was always worth the risk. And then Morrison killed him for it. Blackwell's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Cassidy's credibility, suggested she was lying for attention, implied she'd been in a consensual relationship with Morrison that had simply gone sour. He made her relive every horrible moment, questioned every detail, tried to break her down. But Cassidy didn't break. She answered every question, met every accusation, held firm against the onslaught. When Blackwell finally gave up, she looked directly at Morrison for the first time since taking the stand. You took 2 years of my life. You took my sense of safety. You took my ability to trust people. You killed a good man who was trying to help me. But you didn't break me. You didn't win. And when they lock you away forever, I'm going to sleep peacefully for the first time in 2 years, knowing you can never hurt anyone again." The jury looked at her with something like awe. Several were crying. Even the judge looked moved. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution called 43 witnesses, entered hundreds of pieces of evidence, built a case so comprehensive that Blackwell's defense seemed to crumble under the weight of it. When the prosecution rested, Brennan looked exhausted but grimly satisfied. Blackwell's defense was simple: create reasonable doubt. He argued that Morrison was being railroaded, that the evidence was circumstantial, that witnesses were lying to save themselves. He called character witnesses who testified that Morrison was a good man, a devoted public servant, a pillar of the community. But when Morrison himself took the stand, everything changed. Blackwell had tried to keep him off the stand, knowing it was a risk. But Morrison insisted, believing his charm and authority would sway the jury. He was wrong. Under Brennan's cross-examination, Morrison's mask slipped. She asked him about specific women, specific dates, specific lies. She confronted him with his own words from the surveillance footage, with his own financial records showing payments from Rothwell, with forensic evidence that directly contradicted his testimony. And Morrison got angry, really angry, the kind of cold, controlled rage that had terrified Redemption for 12 years. He snapped at Brennan, talked down to her, dismissed her questions with contempt. The jury saw the real Frank Morrison, the bully, the predator, the man who thought his badge made him untouchable. "You think you've won," Morrison said, leaning forward in the witness box, his voice dripping venom. "You think putting me in prison changes anything? There will always be men like me. Men who do what's necessary to keep order. Men who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. You can convict me, but you can't change human nature." "You're right," Brennan said quietly. "I can't change human nature. But I can make sure you never hurt anyone again. I can make sure you spend every remaining day of your life in a cell knowing that Tommy Calabrese, a man you considered beneath you, was the one who brought you down. That Cassidy Warren, a woman you terrorized and abused, had the courage to stand up to you when it mattered. That everything you built, everything you controlled, everything you were proud of has been completely destroyed." Morrison's face went purple with rage. For a moment, Jackson thought he might actually attack Brennan right there in the courtroom. But the bailiffs were ready, hands on their weapons, and Morrison slowly sank back in his chair, his control finally shattered. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they came back, the four women stood and read the verdict in a clear, steady voice. "On the count of first-degree murder of Jennifer Martinez, we find the defendant guilty." Helen Williams let out a sob. Cassidy gripped Jackson's hand so tight his fingers went numb. "On the count of first-degree murder of Maria Gonzalez, we find the defendant guilty." The four women kept reading. Guilty, 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 14 times, 14 murders, plus guilty on every other charge: assault, corruption, conspiracy, evidence tampering. Morrison sat frozen, his face blank, as his entire life collapsed around him. Blackwell slumped in his chair, knowing he'd just lost the biggest case of his career. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the courtroom cleared, Jackson found Cassidy in the hallway, surrounded by other survivors, by victims' families, by people who'd finally seen justice done. "It's over," she said, her voice full of wonder. "It's actually over." "Not quite. Still got Rothwell's trial. But Morrison's done. He's never getting out. That's what matters." Rothwell's trial was shorter, simpler. With Morrison already convicted, with Crawford and Torres testifying about Rothwell's direct involvement in the conspiracy, with financial records showing millions of dollars in bribes, the case was overwhelming. Rothwell's lawyers tried to argue he'd been coerced, that he was a victim too, that Morrison had manipulated him. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted him on all counts after deliberating for just 4 hours. Sentencing day came on a crisp October morning. Morrison was brought into the courtroom in shackles, wearing prison orange, looking 20 years older than he had at the start of the trial. The judge, the same Judge Harmon who'd presided over the suppression hearing, looked at him with unconcealed disgust. "Mr. Morrison, I've been a judge for 32 years. I've seen murderers, rapists, child abusers, every kind of monster society produces. But you represent something particularly evil. You were sworn to protect and serve. You were given authority, trust, respect. And you used that position to terrorize, abuse, and murder innocent women for over a decade." The judge paused, letting that sink in. "You showed no remorse, no empathy, no recognition of the horror you inflicted. The law allows me to sentence you to life without parole on each count of murder. I'm imposing those sentences consecutively. That means you are sentenced to 210 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will die in prison, Mr. Morrison, and may God have mercy on your soul because this court has none. Morrison's face remained blank. No emotion, no reaction, just emptiness. Rothwell's sentencing was less dramatic but equally final. 50 years for conspiracy, racketeering, and accessory to murder. He'd be 93 years old before he'd even be eligible for parole. His billion-dollar empire was being dismantled. His assets seized, his properties sold to compensate victims' families. Outside the courthouse, Jackson found himself surrounded by people who wanted to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him how much it meant that he'd stood up when others wouldn't. Eugene was there, tears streaming down his weathered face. Helen Williams hugged him hard enough to crack ribs. Cassidy stood beside him, holding his hand, finally looking like she might believe she was safe. A reporter pushed a microphone in Jackson's face. Mr. Reeves, you and your club have been credited with breaking this case open. How does it feel to have brought down one of the most corrupt law enforcement officials in Arizona history? Jackson looked at the camera, thought about Tommy, thought about all the lives lost, all the pain inflicted, all the evil that had flourished in the darkness. We didn't do this for recognition or glory. We did it because Tommy Calabrese, our brother, believed that one person standing up against injustice could make a difference. He died proving that. So if you want to credit anyone, credit Tommy, credit Cassidy for her courage, credit Eugene for telling the truth, credit every person who refused to let fear silence them. What's next for you? We go home. We remember our fallen brother. We try to help this town heal. And we stay ready because there are more Morrisons out there, more corrupt officials hiding behind badges, more predators hunting the vulnerable. And when we find them, we'll do exactly what we did here. We'll stand up, we'll fight back, and we'll make damn sure justice is served. The reporter asked more questions, but Jackson was done talking. He found his brothers gathered by their bikes, 40 men who'd dropped everything to help take down a killer, who'd stood guard and protected witnesses and put their lives on the line for people they'd never met. Ghost nodded at him. Ready to ride? Yeah, let's go home. They mounted their bikes' engines, roaring to life in perfect symphony. As they rolled out of Phoenix, heading back toward redemption, and whatever came next, Jackson felt the weight of the past months start to lift. Tommy's death had been avenged. Morrison and Rothwell would die in prison. The town of Redemption would finally live up to its name. Cassidy had decided to stay in Phoenix, working with Linda at the shelter, helping other survivors find their strength. Eugene was rebuilding his diner with insurance money and donations from the community. The victims' families had closure, finally knowing what had happened to their loved ones. It wasn't a perfect ending. Too many people had died. Too much pain had been inflicted. Too many scars would never fully heal. But it was justice. Real justice. The kind Tommy had believed in. The kind worth dying for. As Jackson rode into the sunset with his brothers beside him, he thought about Tommy's last words to Cassidy, about how the world had more good people than bad, about how sometimes you just had to survive long enough to find them. Tommy had been right. Evil was real, but so was courage. So was loyalty. So was brotherhood. And when good people stood together, refused to be intimidated, refused to look away, even the worst monsters could be defeated. That was the legacy Tommy had left them. That was the truth Jackson would carry with him for the rest of his days. Some battles were worth fighting no matter the cost. Some people were worth dying for. And some promises, like the promise to stand up against evil, to protect the innocent, to never let a brother's death be meaningless, were worth keeping forever no matter how hard the road ahead might be.